A single woman playing farmer? You have 2 weeks to accept my offer, or my lawyers will find a reason to take it anyway. The man's voice, slick with unearned authority, echoed across the dusty yard. His name was Silas Thorne, a developer whose wealth was eclipsed only by his arrogance, and his entourage of assistants chuckled on cue. They saw a quiet woman in worn jeans, her hands calloused from work, her face a mask of neutrality. They saw weakness. But Sheriff Brody, watching from his cruiser parked 100 yards down the road, saw something else. He saw a ramrod-straight posture that no farmer possessed. He saw a profound, unsettling calm in the face of a direct threat. He saw the way her eyes didn't just look at Thorne, but scanned his companions, the tree line, the access road. A subtle, ceaseless assessment of her environment. The developer laughed again, mistaking her silence for fear. It was not fear. It was the patience of a predator. It was the discipline of a professional. If you believe respect is earned, not demanded, type earned below. Sarah Morgan said nothing. When Thorne and his condescending crew finally drove off in a cloud of self-important dust, she simply picked up her post-hole digger and resumed her work. Her farm was small, nestled in a valley the developers coveted, but it was a bastion of order. The fence lines were perfect. The tools in her barn were not just stored but staged, each one clean, oiled, and placed for maximum efficiency. This was not the property of someone playing at farming. It was the domain of a person for whom precision was an instinct. Thorne's campaign of harassment began the next day. Surveyors would appear at her property line, driving stakes into the earth with theatrical finality. Drones with blinking red lights would buzz low over her fields at dusk, a constant, invasive presence. His lawyers sent letters filled with convoluted threats and baseless claims of code violations. The town began to whisper, the assumptions spreading like weeds. Most pitted the poor single mother being bullied by a powerful man. A few, beholden to Thorne's influence, sided with him, calling her stubborn. Through it all, Sarah remained a portrait of quiet competence. She didn't call the sheriff. She documented. She photographed the surveyors, logged the drone flight times, and filed the threatening letters in a neat, orderly binder. Her silence was a fortress, and her methodical preparation was the sharpening of a blade no one knew she possessed. The campaign of intimidation inevitably escalated to direct confrontation. Thorne, enraged by her refusal to break, sent 3 men to her farm as the sun bled out behind the hills. They were not lawyers or surveyors. They were blunt instruments, hired for their size and their casual cruelty, dispatched to deliver a message of physical dominance. They found her near the barn, finishing her chores. They fanned out, their movements sloppy but menacing, designed to corner and intimidate. The boss is done being patient, one of them sneered, kicking over a metal water trough. The clang of metal on hard-packed earth was a declaration of war. It was the formal challenge. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't scream for help or retreat toward the house. Instead, she performed a single, deliberate action. She placed the hammer she was holding gently on top of a fence post, the movement slow, smooth, and utterly devoid of panic. Her hands were empty. Her body was still. Her eyes, however, were alive, tracking the subtle shifts in their weight, the glances between them, the overconfidence in their smirks. In that moment of profound stillness, she was no longer a farmer. She was an operator, and the field of engagement had been set. The first man lunged, a clumsy, telegraphed rush meant to overwhelm. What happened next was not a fight. It was a problem being solved. Sarah's body moved with a terrifying economy of motion that defied his momentum. A slight pivot, a redirected arm, a precise and devastating application of leverage to his elbow joint. He went down with a choked gasp of pain, his own force used against him. The second thug, momentarily stunned, reacted with instinct, pulling a cheap knife. The blade flashed in the twilight. But for Sarah, it was a familiar variable in a well-rehearsed equation. Her hand intercepted his wrist, not with a block, but with a fluid, python-like grip that twisted and controlled. A sharp, upward pressure on a single nerve cluster, and his fingers went numb, the knife clattering uselessly to the gravel. The third man, who had been watching with a predator's grin, froze. The grin evaporated, replaced by the wide-eyed, primal terror of prey that has just realized its fatal miscalculation. He saw his two companions neutralized on the ground, one clutching a hyperextended arm, the other staring at a hand that would not obey him. He saw a woman standing in the center of it all, her breathing perfectly even, her stance a picture of balanced, lethal potential. The entire event took less than 5 seconds. It was followed by a silence so complete it was a physical force, broken only by the whimpering of the defeated and the frantic, ragged gasps of the man left standing. He stumbled backward, his arrogance shattered, and ran. Sheriff Brody's patrol car rolled up the long gravel driveway, just as the third man scrambled into the darkness. He'd been on his way already, a bad feeling gnawing at him since he'd witnessed Thorne's confrontation earlier. He cut the engine but left the headlights on, illuminating the scene like a stage play. He saw the two men on the ground, incapacitated with a chilling, clinical precision. No chaotic brawl, no signs of a desperate struggle, just efficient, targeted disablement. Then he saw Sarah. She stood under the pale glow of the barn light, not breathing heavily, not trembling with adrenaline, but calmly observing the perimeter as if expecting a secondary threat. It was in that moment, the stance, the calm, the professional assessment of the battle space, that the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for the old sheriff, a combat veteran himself. He had seen that posture before. He had seen it in Baghdad, in Kandahar, in men and women who carried the weight of a secret world on their shoulders. He got out of his car, his movements slow and deliberate, his eyes fixed on the woman who was so much more than she appeared. He didn't approach her as a potential victim or even a suspect. He approached her with a dawning, profound sense of reverence. "Ma'am, for my report, I'm going to need to see some identification," Sheriff Brody said, his voice steady, betraying none of his shock. It was the only pretense he could think of. Sarah nodded, retrieved her wallet from the house, and handed him her driver's license. Back in his cruiser, he ran her name, Sarah Morgan, not through the county system, but through a restricted federal database he had access to from his time in Army intelligence. The screen flickered, and the information that populated was not that of a farmer. The narrator's voice would read the file like a litany of honor. Name: Morgan Sarah. Last known rank: Sergeant First Class, retired. Unit: 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. Service history: classified. Specializations: counterterrorism, direct action, hostage rescue, close quarters combat. Awards and commendations: Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor Device, Purple Heart. Brody stared at the screen, the words confirming the impossible truth. He looked through his windshield at the quiet single mother standing on her porch, a silent guardian hiding in plain sight. He slowly exited his vehicle, walked directly to her, and stopped 3 feet away. He stood straight, brought his heels together, and rendered a slow, perfect salute. "Sergeant Morgan," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that transcended his office. "I apologize for the disturbance on your property this evening. It won't happen again." The story of the sheriff's salute became the spark that lit a wildfire of truth across the county. His deputy, who arrived as backup and witnessed the gesture of profound respect, was the first to spread the word. He told his wife, who told her sister, who worked at the town diner. Sheriff Brody himself, over a quiet beer at the local VFW post, confirmed the story to a handful of other veterans, his voice low and reverent. The whispers about the poor, stubborn farmer died instantly, replaced by a mythology that grew with each telling. Silas Thorne's hired thugs, under Brody's pointed and deeply informed interrogation, confessed everything, eagerly implicating the developer to save themselves. Thorne was arrested, his tailored suit and smug confidence looking absurd under the fluorescent lights of the county jail. The charges were serious: conspiracy, aggravated assault, witness intimidation. His empire, built on bluster and bullying, began to crumble. The news of his downfall and the incredible truth about Sarah Morgan became the only topic of conversation. The legend of the quiet woman on the old farm was born not out of boastful words, but out of a single, undeniable demonstration of competence. Humbled and facing ruin, Silas Thorne made one last trip to Sarah Morgan's farm. Out on bail, his reputation in tatters and his business deals collapsing, he drove up the gravel road not with an entourage, but alone. He found her in the garden, showing her young son how to carefully place seeds into the soil, her hands, which had so recently disabled trained men, now demonstrating the gentle art of creation. She did not acknowledge his arrival. She continued her lesson, her voice soft and patient. Thorn stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching, stripped of all his former arrogance. He was a man confronting the wreckage of his own assumptions. I'm sorry, he finally stammered, the words feeling hollow and inadequate. Sarah looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was no anger in her gaze, no triumph, only a deep, abiding calm. Actions have consequences, Mr. Thorn, she said, her voice even and firm. It was the longest sentence she had ever spoken to him. It was all that needed to be said. She had not sought his apology, nor did she need it. She had simply stated a fundamental law of the universe, a law he had ignored at his peril. He turned and walked away, a man who had finally learned that real power is never loud. In the weeks and months that followed, a quiet transformation took place. The farm, once a symbol of struggle, became a symbol of resilience. A new, hand-painted sign appeared at the end of the driveway, a gift from the veterans at the VFW post. It read simply, "Morgan's Landing, the community, once distant, now rallied around her." A volunteer group of neighbors and fellow veterans spent a weekend helping her repair the old barn, their laughter and the sound of hammers replacing the menacing silence of drones. The local grocer proudly displayed her produce with a sign that said, "Grown by a local hero." The story of Sarah Morgan became institutional folklore, a lesson taught by Sheriff Brody to every new deputy about the danger of assumptions. Her legend wasn't about the violence of that evening. It was about the strength that had made it so swift and decisive. It was about the quiet professional who asked for nothing but to be left in peace, and in defending that peace, reminded an entire community of what true strength looks like. True legacy is not etched in stone or listed in a file. It is planted in the soil and nurtured in the hearts of others. Sarah Morgan's strength was not in the medals she had earned, but in the peace she had cultivated. She hadn't sought a battle, but when the battle came to her doorstep, she met it with the silent, overwhelming force of her training and character. She proved that competence is its own argument, that discipline is its own voice, and that respect is the natural consequence of demonstrated excellence. Her story became a quiet anthem for the overlooked, a testament to the fact that the most formidable individuals are often those who have nothing to prove. They are the silent guardians, the quiet professionals living among us, whose worth is not measured by the noise they make, but by the world they protect with their calm, steady hands. For more stories where quiet strength triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent resolve defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.